Greetings to everyone. Today we continue our discussion club. We are talking today about regenerative agriculture. This is done by AgroCare together with the National Certification Body Organic Standard and BTU Center Company with the support of the Swiss program. That is implemented by the Institute FiBL of Switzerland in partnership with Safosa, Switzerland. And we have the information partner where you can find useful information. Today we are talking about regenerative agriculture. There's no one definition of what is organic regenerative agriculture. There are many practices which cover the regenerative agriculture. First of all, that's the health of the soil. We need to minimize the structure of soil. There should be biodiversity. Regenerative agriculture uses more comprehensive approach to production of agricultural crops and animal production. And the goal of regenerative agriculture is to improve the situation. We today have two international experts. First one is Mykola Bykov, the expert of FAO, and he's the advisor on agricultural issues. Mykola, do you hear? We don't hear you, Mykola. Yes, I switched to Ukrainian. I am now launching. Anna, are you launching as well? Okay. We have the slides in Ukrainian here. I am Bykov Mykola, and I will try to answer the most difficult question. What is regenerative agriculture, regenerative restored agriculture? That is the term that that is used for the last 10, 15 years, and that is related to some practices which some farmers are implementing. They see that they don't just preserve their soils, but they regenerate it. It's the most difficult part, and that is why the new term was a new term appeared. It's quite disputable. I will give you my point of view. I have conducted some research, and now I would like to tell you one fable. One wise man met three persons who were building a house, and he was asking, what are you doing? One says, I lay bricks, I do some work. Another say, I have 5 children, I have to earn money. And another said, the third said, I built a house, I built some. This is different attitude to the work which you are doing and to your perception. If we look at the farmers at agriculture, they are also divided into 3 categories. And they do just the work that their parents were doing. Others say we're investors. We invest into agriculture and we have to take something away. And they talk about business models. And the third ones say that we do something. We create ecosystem, we preserve the soil, we grow ecological organic products. And these are people who are talking about more than just getting money, getting enjoyment. It's something more, which refers to our view on life. And I will talk about that more. I would like us to remember these 3 principles so that we understand what we are talking about. If you look at some conclusions, I tried to make my own conclusion based on the conclusions of other experts, and that is the regenerative agriculture is the intention to restore soil health and the environment as a whole. There are some simplified terms, but I like this one because we want to restore the health, not the soil. We do have a soil. We have maybe black soil, more black, less black soil, but the health of a soil is quite a complicated term. Biologists are talking about it. Some pioneers are showing that the soil is like its own ecosystem. It's to us and others. And we also have to restore the environment. We know that within the last 200 years, many insects, animals, and plants disappeared. That's related with the activities of human beings. And now there are regenerative practices which tell us we need to restore. It's difficult to explain, it's difficult to measure how much everyone regenerates. And I try to uh, divide all that into some achievements. And first thing, we are regenerating the topsoil. The roots live in the topsoil. And in our practices, the topsoil, which could be different, we want it to be improved. There's a photograph and that shows different technologies of people with different approaches. And you see the difference. And the difference is that it's not uh, uh, the main rock which changes, but the topsoil, bacteria, worms, animals, and some insects. So you don't have to go 3-5 meters in depth deep. And regenerative practices trying to look at the topsoil soil. And we want also to increase the biodiversity of crops, insects, and animals. If before my colleague, Mr. Kasalap, he was saying that we are not destroying, we are not eliminating the insects, we are controlling, we are managing, we are not burning everything. But at the same time, we are trying to get a better crop. But now the trend is that we need to create such conditions, use such practices that we receive crops, but at the same time, we preserve different bioorganisms. That's one of the parameters which are discussed by those who are in regenerative practices to improve the water cycle. Well, you can buy a tractor, you can buy sprinkler seeds, but water is nature and water cycle is standard. If we when tilling, if we put some minerals or pesticides into the water, and we cannot do something so that it doesn't go into river and then gets to the topsoil, then we harm everything. And that is why we need to ensure a high quality of water cycle. Improving the ecosystem functioning. Here we are talking when regenerative practices talk about more than about the crop rotation. They affect what's around the farm. They create certain ecosystem. We all heard about the problem of carbon emissions and greenhouse gases, and one of the methods is the support for bio-sequestration and also receiving the healthy products. That is what regenerative practices show us. The key things that we need to think about, because later there might be some differences. We want not to harm the land, not to harm the biodiversity. We need to do our work. And our work is about getting some food, but we need to maximum limit the loss of soil, biodiversity, and at the same time create the precedent so that we are regenerating. Now, the principles, the regenerative agriculture uses the such thing as principles. And some say there are 5 core principles. I like this author. You can look at this article where he's talking about 6 principles of regenerative agriculture. And the first one is to change understanding context of your farm operation. If the person doesn't have this principle, then it will be difficult to implement other principles because the person will not believe, will not know that he is regenerating something, that it's not just about getting profit and growing something, but it's about changing activity around. That's first what we see, and this could be organic, people who use organic or non-organic. The first thing they have to show how they change their attitude. And then there are 5 principles which we will discuss, and we'll briefly discuss them. They're simple, but at the same time complicated. In the end, we'll have some discussion. The second principle, first, is minimize the soil disturbance. It talks about the principle how to reduce the tilling of soil. There are different approaches to that, but the most interesting thing is regenerative practice doesn't talk about specific methodology. The person who understands that wants to change the world to the better is trying to change and minimize the tilling, minimize the disturbance of soil. There could be something for each of us. You can start from some small movements, and then you can move to no-till or organic no-till. It depends on where you are moving, but the principle says that we have to maximum reduce the disturbance of soil. The second principle is maximize crop diversity. Some people say it's increasing the crop rotation, but people understand that maximizing crop diversity means from 2 crops go to 5, and that is perceived as regenerative practice. Some say, I want to increase up to 10 crops, I want to increase the number of crops because I sow flowers, for example. Okay, that's also a practice, but that's this farmer's practice. The main thing is we increase, we maximize the biodiversity on our field. The next principle is keep the soil covered or leave the soil so that it's not bare. We are trying to have the soil not covered by plants the minimum time or covered by plant residues. Why that's happening? Because in nature, the soil is always covered. It could be by leaves, by plant residues. We don't see black soil. People, as part of their activity, decide that that's the best, but the regenerative practice says that we need to get closer to nature. Why? Because it's very useful, beneficial. The next interesting thing, and that's what microbiologists saw, they see that our microorganisms, they need a living root system year-round, and we see the symbiosis only in legumes, but there are some bacteria there which you can see, but in fact everything is much more complicated. 95% of microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, they live in the soil and they're connected to roots, and only 5% are pathogenic, and they can not always be pathogenic. but under some conditions, they became pathogenic. And for the soil to become living, the root system should become a key for life of other organisms. And this principle, and everyone is trying hard, they are using cover plants, they extend the period of vegetation or growing system. And another practice is integrate livestock. And that's when there's natural grazing. We don't have the grazing in the fields. We have some meadows, but to take the cows to the field, which are divided into sections, we don't have such a practice. But in other countries, they do have it. Maybe in time we'll have it, and then we'll be implementing this principle. Let's look at what is regenerative. I will try to subdivide that into different parts. We understand that in Ukraine, we have an intensive system of production where they use mineral fertilizers, pesticides, and that's for two things, to getting a yield, and there are some environmental restrictions so that people are not poisoned, birds, animals, insects are not poisoned. But we have the two goals, not to violate the environmental laws and get some profit. Also, we have an organic production which is up to 1%. And this production where it's prohibited to use pesticides or mineral fertilizers. The principle is you have to get some crop, you have to be profitable, but your production is limited by certain things or restricted. And there are alternatives when people use permaculture, they use different mixed things. I decided that it's 0.2%. And what is regenerative? Where its place is? In fact, regenerative practices or principles, they should be present in each one of these approaches. The farm would conduct intensive type of agriculture, but if the owner started using the practices, the regenerative practices, he's measuring it, he sees that the humus, they have more humus, the biological activity increased, there are more worms, more insects now. The farmer sees that even though he uses some pesticides, but he's improving the soil. And there's organic producer who started to introduce some practices so that the soil gets regenerated. He needs organic fertilizers. He needs to select some tilling to make it not so deep. And there are those who use alternative other methods. And our task is to regenerate soil, to create healthy soil, and use these 5 principles. And here we get to the situation when these 5 principles we cannot always use, but we can practice things which will improve the soil. Now let's discuss every one of these principles and let's try to deepen the minimum soil disturbance, what it gives us. The minimal soil disturbance reduces soil erosion. That's one of the principles when they started to introduce the minimum tilling. Then they had some dust storms, and then certain things were developed. The second thing, from the experience, that when implementing minimum tilling, it shows that humus horizon increases because these practices are regenerating the soil. And that's what you can see why we do it. And what could be tilling? We reduced the number of tillings. We had 6, now 4. Then we had sometime the tilling with turning the soil, and now we're doing it without turning the soil, and we change it within the practice. Then we need to understand that we have specific solutions which are directed towards reducing the number of tillings. I made some conclusions. I decided not to deepen into the scientific terms, but first there's mini-till uh, um, when it's not more than 15 centimeters. No-till is direct sowing without soil tillage and turning, and strip till is strip sowing when we till a small part, like 30%, to prepare the soil at a high quality. And next year we'll be talking about some other practices. They are not for farmers. They could be for a small farm or individual farm. And that's where we are moving to. Everyone will have a different no-till, or will have different strip-till. Like when spring or autumn, strip-till will be different. And that's quite an interesting table, which shows how there could be different worms, and the worm doesn't like when the environment changes, when he's turned, when he wants to have some canal so that it can move. It can move where there are plant residues, where there's wet, and when we do some tilling and it's not comfortable, it doesn't feel comfortable, it goes lower. If we plow for 30 centimeters, if we have combined cultivation, we have some surface tilling and deep, then it can move to upper horizons. Mini-till, you can see it goes up and it expands its environment, and it can move the strip-till also. It tries not to go where there might be some pesticides and fertilizers and salts, and no-till where there's a very small zone of tilling. The worm can move there. That's visualization, which shows everything. And if you know the technologies you can take in this soil, you can calculate number of worms, and one of the indicators of regeneration of the soil is the number of worms. The development of biodiversity, I call it so because we understand there could be different approaches. When we change the crop rotation, we reduce soil erosion. Erosion is one of the complicated processes which is most harmful. Then we improve the soil structure when we have cover crops and crop rotation. The structure of the soil improves. We have better structured soil, and we have the increase in the number of beneficial insects, because otherwise the insects have nowhere to live, they don't have what to eat. But when we expand the biodiversity, we can expand or increase the number of insects. And what do we have? White crop rotation, we had 2 crops, now 10, just legumes, because legumes are very beneficial. We are sowing perennial grasses. Maybe we will not be using them completely, but we moved from cover crops to perennials. binary crops. It's when simultaneously you sow two crops. You can see one of our lectures where we give an example how we mix, for example, different crops, the wheat and some others, and the binary crops allows us to improve the structure. It's interesting because for every crop, for every plant, there is its own number of bacteria that live in roots. So that's interesting. Biologists say that we see that different bacteria, different fungi, they are connected to different plants, and the more plants we have, the better it will be for crops. Then cover crops, sowing green manure and cover crops. It's recommended to introduce legume cover crops. You don't see the profitability in legume crops, but if you sow them after the wheat, for example, then it improves the quality of soil. Then use of then it's all related with biodiversity. In Bila Cerkva, they made some tests on bioorganic soya and on some other crops, and then most and in organic fields, and in soya they had 1.5 times more insects because pesticides are not used, and reduction of use of pesticides is also one of the regenerative practices. Another practice is crop soil protection. Some say, how will you do it? Will you be running around with a stick? But we say we are trying to reduce the soil, reduction of soil overheating. You see, when you remove some residues, you see that there is a difference in temperatures. And there might be the situation when in the middle of the summer, the temperature of the soil is above 40 degrees. And we know that if it is more than 40 degrees, many organisms perish. And the second is prevention of moisture loss. When we cover with residue, then we preserve the moisture. What we do with the plant residues, sometimes we do it, we burn plant residues. The regenerative practice requires not to burn plant residues. Second, we have to try not to work plant residues into the soil. We need to leave them on the surface so that reduces overheating and prevents moisture loss. Also, the residues maybe are not so needed, and so we have to do mulching of plant residues to protect the soil. And also there is an interesting solution like the how we use the windrow, and the windrow leaves some stems, and in this case we get a very good effect from accumulating the moisture, and also there are some photographs. You can see that in different presentations. This is taken from textbook of the system of agriculture. You can see what is the temperature with different tilling. Different tilling leads to heating or high temperature or lowering. And here you see the in Kirovograd Oblast, the temperature, the soil, which is not covered by the plant residues, and there is some field which is covered, and the difference in temperature is very high. And that is the practice which is very useful for soil. And the next is also taken from a textbook. There's a number of picture and a figure, and it shows how the loss of water will react. And we need to say, we need to understand how rain is, and then
And with the decomposing vegetation, we can have incentive precipitation 30, 50 millimeters an hour, and then the decomposed vegetation can hold the water, so to speak, and provide for the soil. This is an interesting slide, and the roots are alive, and whether they are alive, how can we tell? This is the live mulch. This is the biological research, microbiology of soils. And the trend is for the humus, for fertility is not just decomposed vegetation, but symbiosis of the bacteria, of live roots. I cannot contribute to this discussion. It's not my place. I think both principles are at work, but mostly biology is on the side of live soil, of humus layers below. That is the uh, substantiated data. Secondly, when we have live roots, we have a great number of bacteria with a symbiotic interaction with the root system, the biota of the soil. How can we expand that? First of all, the perennial crops, 80 days for soybean and so on. Or 130 after 90 days, there is no live root, and this is bacteria, this is fungi, and this and this is suspended. If we have 70 prolong this for 20 days, it is perpetuated, and we can exchange and get charged, like people get charged with information. There are very good crops. I don't know whether Alexey Yazykov is joining us. He will share his experience, and he will show the difference of the Mascantis crops, the vegetation, the humidity indicators, the practice that is long since developed, but we sometimes tend to forget, though it is good for such crops, binary crops, two or trinary crops, and for the availability and in the soil. There is a good case study. Mr. Ivanuk is telling us that when they planted crops, this is peas and barley, for 2 or 5 years, the soil is charged with energy, because soybean provide for good biota of the soil, and you can see that in the field. You can see the covering crops like winter wheat. You can see that the biological processes are sort of suspended when we sow covering crops before or after harvesting. During the harvesting, perennial herbs, they can work for 2 or 3 years in the same environment. Let me make a reference to specific research, and this is from a manual again, you can see the in green and yellow the crop growing and live roots, and in white the period when we make a pause and the root system is not live, but and this is sort of rational, not rational, let's say. We use that P for 60% of the time, with the remaining 40, we do not employ any cultivation process. Like we can sow the covering crops, apply them properly, but we can see that we have some reserve for development of the soil with the coverage crops. And integrate it into cattle breeding. I had that experience 2010. One of the holdings planned to use this with the electric shepherds, as we call it, from the good meat for production. And this practice in Ukraine is underdeveloped, but I think we can demonstrate with research results that rational pasture makes erosion less relevant and less significant to manifest it, and this should be just not about stomping, and this is managed breed pasture. This is a farmer, and they have the coverage crops, and they have great meat, and this is highly profitable. And some great farmers with organic farming, and they provide the 5 principles which are acceptable most of the time. This is a Canadian farmer who does the minimum cultivation in organic farming, using the equipment which is light and not heavy duty, and they try to do that with regenerating practices as much as they can. You can see the crop rotation typical for this farmer. You can see perennial herbs coverage and crops, and we can have the minimum intervention, and we can see that there is some cattle breeding by this particular farmer. It is for that kind of cultivation, it is not that easy. They have one field for assigned to the pasture, but it's worth the while. He reports, and he is proceeding with this right now. This is not an organic farming household, but they have direct crops, and then they started to expand. It's a unique household, unique farming family, because now they have such a broad crop rotation when they have a lot of legume and grain and their own shop. But the way they proceeded, they have great leguminous crops, and technical tracks are provided not to put too much pressure on the soil, and there is a broader coverage of the soil to prevent overheating. With binary crops, the yields increased, and it does not use any pesticides, does not apply any they have the gap for the needs, for the pests, and the resource spatial kind of crop rotation. When one crop is still there, another one is introduced, the other one is introduced. This is the kind of rotation when they changing their approach. They do the relay race kind of approach. And sorry, I can see a presentation. You have 10 slides to go in 3 minutes. I'm speeding up for the sake of our interpreters. So it should be more intensive and much faster. Now another farmer with biological compounds being produced, but this is not just about those preparations. There are things that they do not sell, and their system of regeneration is a bit broader. Well, there are some companies who have it as its goal to support farmers with the regenerative, like PepsiCo, Nestle, and other companies that are very keen on concluding contracts with the farmers to introduce regenerative practices. This is accepted by many companies, and they do. Now let me say one thing. I think that the 5 principles are not always providing regeneration and regenerative practices. We can and should do that in a different way. There are sands and sand bearing layers, and this is better for the micro elements because the such soils lack them. And fertilization, the decrease of application of such fertilizers, and also regeneration of regenerative practices with inoculants applied after the hostilities, so the missile impacts. We can apply humates for the poor soils activation of vegetation. Sometimes we have to develop the root system. If we need the root system to develop inoculation of seeds, the feed, the nutrition for the vegetation, the roots should be embedded deeply. Biological techniques as an important component, I think, with the regenerative farming, we should replace chemical techniques with biological ones. There are many solutions. We have a whole seminar and the structure of biochar and mobilizing bacteria. And we have to recognize this as a system that is worth farmers' while. And we have to create the regenerative production system in place because we have different practices. And most importantly, we have to progress and improve continuously. You can look up the links. The presentation will be attached to the video. Follow the link, read and develop. And the Ukrainian platform of organic knowledge, by next year, we will have regenerative practices in place. And of course, I need another 30 minutes. I hope you will let me have a couple of presentations next year, 2 or 3 events. It takes not 5 but 10 practices. So thank you very much, Vitalii. I would like to add by next year we plan we will have 5 events for regenerative practices. So let's postpone the questions to the very end. We have Bachelor of Agricultural Engineering, agronomist, expert on organic crops from FiBL, Switzerland, and he will discuss organic cultivation, farming, solutions for the farmers and the process of transition. He will speak in English. We have simultaneous interpretation, so please switch to the Ukrainian channel if you need interpretation, if your English is not sophisticated enough. Nicolas,
Yes.
you will have your Ukrainian presentation. All right.
Yes. Can we start?
Tak.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, please.
All right. Okay, can you see the screen properly?
Так, ми бачимо українську
Yes,
версію.
we can see the Ukrainian version. Yes,
Perfect.
please.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicolas Lefebvre. I'm presenting for the third time webinar in the frame of AgroCare AgroClub discussion. I'm very happy to be here to discuss today about regenerative agriculture, and more than this, how to integrate regenerative practices in organic farming, which is, let's say, one step beyond regenerative. The program of today would be divided in 3 chapters. One introduction, very quickly, the principle of regenerative farming. I had a very nice introduction by Mykola, and for sure we are sharing the same view on regenerative, so the principles are quite the same. Then we will see in practice challenge and solution to adopt regenerative principle in organic. So what are the challenge and what are the main solution that organic farmers have at their disposal to implement these practices. Then a few appendices and a few conclusions. So about the principles, I'm missing the very #1 principle of Mykola, which was understanding the context of the farm, which is also very important, and I found it very, very interesting to integrate it as a principle. The first principle I have is reduction or abandonment of soil disturbance through less intensive tillage practices. The second principle is to maintain ground cover, if possible, living ground cover. The third principle is to keep the roots alive in the soil as much as possible. The fourth principle is creating as much diversity and biodiversity as possible. And the fifth principle, integrating animals into the system. What is very important is that we discuss about a notion of principles and not absolute. It's not 5 goals to reach, and if you don't, you are not regenerative. There are principles to follow as best as possible. That's the idea behind. So let's take them a little bit in detail. Soil disturbance. Why limiting soil disturbance? What is creating soil disturbance? Soil disturbance is affecting the physics of the soil. The soil is a complex network of cavities, microporosities. The porosity of the soil actually is what we disturb, and also the exchange of oxygen with the soil. On the chemical side, this is we are touching there the balance of natural exchanges of elements, but also the circulation of water in the soil. Then on the biological point of view, soil disturbance will affect fauna and microfauna, the worms for sure, but also the fungal, the mycorrhizae, and everything which is living into the soil. When we speak about no-till practices, it's mainly about, first of all, avoiding total turning, meaning avoiding plowing, the moldboard plowing that we know for sure. It's about, first of all, as a principle, to intervene as little as possible, but as much as necessary. The farm is, first of all, economical an economic unit and needs to be profitable. So the farmer will decide whether it is really necessary to plow at some point. But the idea is to have the tools to decide whether it is necessary or not to use plowing. Also, as principle, it's really important to take into account the biological activity and then the concept of refuges. The refuge, we have seen it in the first presentation. I'm really glad to hear about strip tilling, no tilling, and so on, minimum tillage. The idea is, we will see it a little bit further, when we are working the soil, trying not to disturb the whole area, but to keep within the working width of the equipment some untouched area where we know that soil and life is not disturbed. For example, strip till is a very good practice in this regard. About soil cover, why maintaining soil cover all the time, and even more a living one? Soil cover is benefic against direct sunlight on the soil. We've seen the example with temperature before. Against the kinematic impact of water drops. So the water drops which are blasting on the soil during heavy rains, that's the starting point, that's the trigger of erosion. This energy of the water touching the soil is the one which disagrees the soil components and start the erosion. Without this impact, we can really reduce erosion. It's also, again, the airspeed at ground level. Having a cover, you don't have the same airspeed at the very ground level, and then you can very decrease evaporation and then loss of water, which under Ukrainian climate and condition is really important. The soil cover, and just beneath the soil cover, we have this organic matter construction interface. This mulch is really exactly where most of the organic matter of the soil is built. So that's a very crucial and strategic layer of the soil. So while living, and not only a dead cover like mulch or straw and so on, living gives you a self-maintenance cover. So the cover it's self-maintaining itself and sometimes rebuilding itself. It's multi-service, providing fertility, but also continued aeration, weed control by taking the space instead of letting the weeds occupying this area, this room. It's also providing food and shelter for biodiversity. And this constitutes what the American calls the green bridge. And we will see it much more with the roots, having all the time living roots in the soil. So keeping roots alive in the soil as much as possible. This is, as a green bridge, essential to maintain continuity in the soil food chain. Some mycorrhizae, for example, they have a lifespan of 15 days if they are not fed by living roots. Once you kill the roots, most of the, once the plants are dying and you don't have replenishment plant or crops in the ground, you have in average 15 days before most of the mycorrhiza and the fungi which are directly linked to the roots, 15 days before they die, almost all of them. It's a free fertilization service for the legumes, sure, but also for some other crops, which are, we have seen it in a previous webinar, which are mining phosphorus, for example. What we don't really know, what is less known is about carbon sequestration, the crucial role of the roots into carbon sequestration. We usually look at the above ground biomass when it comes to sequestrating carbon in the soil, but actually carbon is mostly sequestrated by the roots, and the roots exudates but also the microbial biomass. Usually the biomass that we see on the top above the ground, a main part of the carbon which is sequestrated and kept into this above ground biomass is released in the atmosphere. When the one sequestrated by the roots and injected by the roots into the soil is much more stable, and in the main part is accounted in the net sequestration. What we know also about and we will see it a little further, some crop sequence can be challenging when we say let's keep roots alive all year round and along the rotation. Some sequences in the crops can really be challenging, even more in organic. Diversity. Why creating as much biodiversity as possible? It is for sure to re-establish natural balances and natural services that we have lost, like Mykola explained before, this balance between benefic insects and pests, and so on. How to re-establish diversity at different, it is important to think about different level. In the landscape, like you can see on the top right picture, a network of biodiversity element and islands. It can be then around the fields with flower strips, can be inserted in the fields with some specific dispositive to bring biodiversity back in the field, but it also the diversity plant by plant. When we are mixing two crops or when we are using a blend, for example, of weed varieties, using 4 or 5 different varieties mixed together in one field instead of cultivating one single weed variety, this is already something that help improving and increasing the biodiversity in the soil, in the fields. Integrating animals and livestock into the system, the last principle. Why is it important? Livestock will improve fertility by increasing soil microbial density and organic matter. So it's really accelerator of soil organic matter creation and of microbial density in the soil. The advantage are more than one. You can, for example, cultivate immature crops like silage crops, and then having, for example, 2 crops in a year instead of 1 pure grain crops. It enables also to value the failure, like the bad quality grains for some animals, for poultry or pork, pig, for example. You can then value your very bad quality grain. And what is very important, we will see some practical example at the end of the presentation, is integrating livestock in the system doesn't necessarily mean that you have to integrate livestock in the company. There's other solutions to have livestock in the fields, which are not your herds, which are not necessarily for your animals. We will see how. Now, let's see about this principle. What are the main challenges and some available solution for organic farmer to try to integrate these regenerative principles to organic farming. So let's come back to the first principle, reducing soil disturbance through no-till farming practices. What are the limits of limiting tillage or going to no-till? What are the limits for organic farming? First of all, why are we using tillage in organic? Mainly for weed management, then to obtain a favorable soil structure or soil porosity, favorable for the roots, and last but not least, to accelerate and to promote mineralization and crop nutrition. So knowing that, what are the technical solutions that we can apply or partially apply to go towards regenerative principles in organic? About weed management, usually farmers, arable organic farmers are using the plow almost every year to to control weeds in the field. What I used to say, and I think I tell this before in the previous webinar, plowing works better when you don't use it. Meaning, if you are plowing regularly year after year, you will have a dilution of the weeds in the whole soil profile, which actually is not helpful anymore. Once you stop plowing every second year or 2 years out of 3 or whatever, you start to reestablish a balance between clean soil from the bottom and infested soil on the top. Once you can stop plowing for 2 or 3 years, then you allow your soil to rebuild, to rebuild porosity, to rebuild soil life, and you will try to disturb it as less as possible. Also, take into account if farmers decide they really have to plow at some point, like they have weed infestation that cannot be controlled only by plowing, for example, try to take into account the biological activity, meaning plowing at the beginning of September will not have the same impact as plowing at the end of November, for example, when all the earthworms are already down in the bottom of your soil profile, and all fungi are already in a dormancy, in a winterizing condition. Trying to plow when the biologic life of the soil is already shut down will really reduce the impact on the soil. It can be sometimes plowing every, let's say, 3 to 5 years, only once, can be the least worst solution sometimes, instead of using cultivator many times to try to get rid of some weeds. Only one major disturbance can be less damaging than 2, 3, 4 grubber or other cultivator passes. About establishing a favorable soil structure or porosity. Plow is not the only tillage equipment that can re-establish the porosity. This equipment on the right, for example, is a low disturbance subsoiler, which can bring the same kind of porosity in the soil, or even better than when working under the hard pan of the soil, without disturbing the soil layer, and also without mixing the topsoil with the bottom one. But first of all, before deciding if you really need deep cracking and deep tillage, define the real need for subsoiling to your soil. Perform a small soil profile or use a penetrometer device. Also, according to the crops, wheat, rye, spelt doesn't need heavy tillage. When maybe rapeseed or peas or other spring crops, they do. Also, for the same equipment, for a given equipment, I have some. Yep. For a given equipment, the settings, different settings can give different results. So try to adapt the settings in order not to disturb, or to disturb as less as possible the soil layers. Sorry. Excuse me. About mineralization and soil nutrition, this is sometimes the most important and the biggest advantage in working intensively soil inorganic, is to supply the crop with nutrients. Before you re-establish living a very thriving soil biology, which can more or less deliver the same nutrient supply as an intensive tillage, for example, you will have for some years to help the crop with, let's say, with another kind of supply of nutrition. This can be done in several ways. The seeder that you see on the left and on the middle is a seeder using a kind of a strip till technology. You have localized tillage right at the bottom of the rows, which will deliver a little bit of nutrition, oxidation of the soil, but not disturbing the wall profile. Or another solution is to use organic fertilizer together with the seeds, like you see on the right. This is mainly the easiest way to counterbalance the lack of nutrition given by the lack of tillage intensity. Mixing organic fertilizer pellet with seeds, having a decent supply of nutrition directly to the plants and to the young plants. Through my experience, I can tell that just going no-till in organic low input system, no-till compared to min-till or compared to minimum tillage can lead to yield losses up to 15 to 20%. So just going no-till without without counterbalancing by another measure like strip till seeder or localization of fertilizer can really lead to lower yields and lower performance. About the living cover, how to keep the soil covered, living is possible. What are the limits for organic farming? The picture that you see there is the farm I used to manage a few years ago in Romania. So quite the same context as in Ukraine. And after a few years, we've been able to manage almost all cereals under living cover, like you can see here. So this one was harvest of oats, white oats under living white clover. What are the limits when you would like to go into this technique of living cover and organic farming? How to establish this crop successfully, but also the canopy, meaning the cover, and most of all, how to preserve the performance in a cohabitation within the two plants in this kind of context. Oops, sorry. To promote the crop establishment, first of all, you have to work on the genetics. So now I will specifically speak about this technique, mixing cereal production and green cover, mainly legumes like clover or alfalfa. One main point is to really choose the right genetics for the cover. For the clover or for the alfalfa, you have to choose real dwarf ones, some clover that are not going to compete and will stay quite low in the profile with the cereal. I have some examples here. You will see it in my presentation. I don't know what's available or not in Ukraine, but usually in Eastern Europe and also Western Europe, one of the well-known white clover is the Ouya. And what I just want to say is it is usually sold as a dwarf one, as a very small clover, and it is not really the case, because this is what we call a polymorphic clover. When he's very alone in a field, in a pure seeding, he will stay very dwarf. Once he have to compete with grass or cereals, he will grow and sometime pass the cereal. So be very careful with the kind of clover you would like to use for this association. Other clovers are more specific, more dwarf, and more adapted to this technique. To establish successfully the cereal, the same. First of all, look at the genetic. So look at the size of your cereals. For example, spelt, rye, and tall wheat, they are working very well. winter barley too, if you are cultivating winter barley. But for example, winter oats or spring barley are not very adapted, or hard wheat also. Take also into account the speeds of recovering and the starting speed in the spring, because usually what we can see in this combination, like you see on this crop, on the picture on the right, this is spelled with alfalfa. This is a very long winterizing alfalfa. You see that on the left, the spelt is already starting to grow in March, when the alfalfa is still under winterizing period. So what you see usually after winter, so who is taking the lead in the race? This will be the plant who will win the race. Okay, so try to use crops which are starting very quick in the spring, and in the same time clover or alfalfa, which are very which have dormancy of very long period, so very late dormancy, let's say. Another way to better control this competition or this association, let's say, is to give some room for each crop. Like you can see, having some lanes cultivated for the cereals and other lanes that are cultivated for the cover, which always gives give the opportunity to always have living roots inside the fields. In this way, we will see it a little further. You can more easily control the growth of the cover in between the rows. What is really also to fine tune for every condition is the architecture regarding the access to light. This is very wide architecture, for example, giving a lot of light to the clover, but in the other hand, you can mechanically control the clover in between the rows. And usually the yield gap are not so important as you could visually assess. So you have the impression that half of the yield is lost because half of the area is not occupied by the cereal on these pictures. But cereals, they have a huge compensation effect and compensation capacity. On this crop, for example, I think the yields was 82-85% of the full area crop, which is quite impressive. Very quickly, how can we establish this crop? A few tips on how to establish the cover into a living cereal, for example. I've seen a lot of implementation of this crop with, let's say, spreading or seeding by just broadcasting small seeds of clover and alfalfa. It's not always successful, and the more I see the more I see this experience, the less I believe in it. What I really think is that proper seeding is the key. Like you can see this seeder in the cereal. When you go in a smaller cereal at the end of the winter, you are not doing any damages, but the success of the seeding is almost 100%. Choose also to establish the cover. You can choose also a less covering cereal. In this case, using winter barley or oats is of better success because you have more light reaching the soil. You can also you can also choose to seed this clover or alfalfa together with rapeseed, with canola, which is quite successful. In France, we see this technique more and more, even for conventional farmers. Or choosing to sow under spring crops, like you can see this sunflower. It was in Romania. So the alfalfa was seeded after the last hoeing of the crop. and it doesn't affect at all the final yields. And in this configuration with sunflower, you really have a lot of light reaching the soil. That's quite I would say quite easy way to establish alfalfa in a standing crop, for example. So very quickly, how to preserve the performance. So how to preserve the yields of the cereal when you are cultivating it together with the clover. You have a few set of measures, preceding, post-seeding measures, and the pre-harvest measure that you can take. Post-seeding measures, we have now a lot of farmers building prototypes, or even companies now building prototypes to try to keep mechanically the cover down. It looks nice on picture. It's really complicated to set up properly without damaging the crop, actually. So I would stay more on the first solution, meaning try to choose the right genetics of very dwarf clover and very tall cereal. As a pre-harvest measure, the swatting of the cereal can be a solution, like on the left, if the cereal is way too developed. But you could be surprised on how combine can handle green biomass. And from my experience, if half of the biomass is straw, like you see on the right, spelled with the alfalfa, if you have half green and half straw, usually the combine can handle it quite well. Maybe a little slower, but without any major problem. Now, about keeping the roots alive in the soil as much as possible. How can we follow this principle into in organic farming? It's quite similar to living mulch. So we are just talking about under the soil level, below soil level. One challenge can be the mechanical control of perennial, but also, and this is maybe less the case in Ukraine, but still, how to establish root vegetable and in the same time keeping roots alive. So here we speak about sugar beets or red beets, but also carrots, potatoes, onions, etc. One main principle is to say, yeah, don't just get stuck with this principle and not touching your soil anymore. If you really need to reestablish a good porosity to the soil, in the soil, try to use a low disturbance machine, and also to encourage a quick reestablishment. So the day after subsoiling, nothing hinders you to seed, be the crop or the next cash crop or cover crop. There's always this gap of 15-20 days without biomass that can really damage the biologic, the life in the soil. Trying to shorten this period as possible. If you really have to, just try to shorten to keep the soil not covered on the shortest period possible. Here we have an example, two examples actually, of how to grow root vegetable and still having living roots in the soil all year round. These ridges for carrots, they have been established 1 year or at least the summer before the crop, and the cover crop has been planted on the ridges. When preparing the ridges in the spring, in a single pass, you have in the same day preparation and seeding. The preparation of the ridge, which will with quite intense tillage, will destroy the remaining cover, and seeding the new crop. in another, this was for carrots. In another example, you have it for potatoes. You have here, it's again in Belgium. In the same day, you have all the operation in the same field, meaning here the cover is still green. You have the mulcher, then you have the tillage, and you have the planting machine. What is usually said is that once you go into this regenerative technique, you don't want to go back to tillage and so on. What experience shows is that you cannot erase the history of the plot just in 1 year or in one operation. If you already have a quite living soil, quite rich in microorganisms, earthworms, and so on, you will not erase all the benefit effects in one pass. So having these kind of crops, maybe on a longer span, like every 5-6 years instead of every 3 years, for example, and in between, if your rotation and if your farm is based on such industrial crops, just widening a little bit the rotation, having a little bit more time of recovery between these two crops, and making as much effort as possible to maintain roots and living cover in the soil in between, will not only keep the soil alive, but also will give you even better results on your industrial crops. Now about diversity and biodiversity. This is usually one measure which is implemented quite a lot on organic farms, bringing back biodiversity in many ways. What are still the challenges that organic farmers can encounter? That's the installation and maintenance of effective strips, not only strips, but effective, to contain invasion of perennial weeds from the field margin, and mainly to preserve the productive land. I would, this third one is usually the main one. Farmers, they don't want to give up good land to establish biodiversity strips. A small annex to start this chapter. It's about carabs, beetles, which are usually more that you can more easily find in organic fields and less plowed fields than in conventional farms. Some recent studies have shown that if the population is dense enough, they can eat up to between 1,000 and 4,000 seeds per square meter, which is a huge number in a year. Each individual is consuming from 1 to a few dozen seeds per day. I've been experiencing it in these living cover and cereal crops, where I didn't have any tillage, no insecticides, either organic or conventional, and almost no weeding practices. At some point, there is no more weeds growing because you are not bringing these seeds on the topsoil from the bottom, and you leave a perfect, let's say, environment for these beetles to feed on the seeds that are falling on the ground. I remember speaking with an English fellow farmer, which was quite advanced in this kind of technique, and he had to stop seeding his cover crop by broadcasting in the weeds. He was used to seed to broadcast buckwheat and clover also in the standing weeds, because after a few weeks there were no more seeds left due to beetles. So even this technique was not working anymore because the beetles were eating his cover crop seeds. And it has been demonstrated by a student in University of I don't remember, Cambridge, I think. He made his PhD study on that. What to know about what are the factors which are favorable and unfavorable to beetles? So of course, intensive tillage will cause the decline of the population, but also the lack of food, which is how to say, quite controversial, and of course the insecticides. when you have the beetles, one factor for which is not favorable for seed predation is the presence of other pests. You have to know that some of these beetles, they are feeding on seeds, but they are also feeding on aphids. They are feeding on other insects. And if the crop, for example, is not sane and is attacked by pests, these insects, they will prefer to go and eat these pests on the plants instead of the seeds. It's better for the crop, but then you might not observe the same seed decrease effect. Also, burying the seeds. This is really important. This is maybe the main point. Once you have even shallow tillage, you are burying part of the seeds. And these beetles, they are not diggers, so they are not going to dig into the soil to find some seeds. They only eat what is on the topsoil. So small annex just to showcase a very direct and very visible effect of good biodiversity in organic farming. How to install and maintain effective strips. One single strip in the middle of the plane will not have a very big effect if it's not connected into a network. That's really the approach that organic farmers have to focus on to build a network of biodiversity effective strips instead of only strips or plots here and there. And what they have to focus on, and this is mainly linked to preserving the productive land, is to make the most of every non-productive land, making the most of the driving path or the headlands in the row crops. The picture on the right is headlands on a organic sunflower field. At the planting, everything was nice, and you might know that mechanical weeding takes a lot of operation in the field. After 3, 4, 5 different operation, you lost almost all the sunflowers on the headlands. And when you don't have the crop, you have weeds upcoming. So you try to cultivate the whole area, like in this field, but at the end, there is almost nothing to harvest on the headlands because you have been running around all the time. And even more, you don't have nothing, you spend some time, and you have a huge stock of weeds for 5 or 10 years ahead. So why not using these headlands to cultivate other crops, to establish biodiversity strips instead of having no harvest and infestation for years? Other ways to install and maintain effective strips. You can use annual strip in the crop. This is, for example, on the top right, Phacelia in weeds, Phacelia and veg, which can easily be set on a seeder, a smaller seeder, which is throwing some seeds at the seeding of cereal. This is one way to install, let's say, annual but effective biostrips in the fields. What is also very important when you have this kind of biodiversity area is the management. It's not only the establishment but also the management. What you see on the bottom is the way that Swiss farmers are cutting the hay. They get even subvention for that. The state asks them to keep some untouched area, even in the grassland like this one, just to have a refuge for the insects, pollinators, and so on. So they have to keep, I think it's 7 or 8% of the field untouched until the next time they cut. This is also the same in biodiversity strips. When you have bigger biodiversity ones, not to cut everything at once, but why not cutting 3 meters out of 6, and then after 2 weeks coming back and cutting the other half. Having flowers everywhere, but cutting everywhere at the same time, doesn't have much effect if you don't have the continuity. How to contain invasion of perennials? There is no real secrets, so a lot of monitoring of these strips, not to have sisal mainly or rumex installing in this settling down in these strips, but also for farmers which are using specific wildflower mixes. Don't be afraid to increase seeding rates, or even better, to mix these blends of flowers with with white cover or with low density or low how to say, low growing grass, for example, just to make sure the soil is fully covered. Usually, this wildflower, they are starting very slowly. They are not very covering the soil, and then there is room for weeds. If you want to establish these strips based on wildflower blends, commercial blends, you better look at also at white clover. I think is the best way to mix the seed with white clover, and to make sure that then the soil will be fully covered and doesn't leave room for weeds. Sorry. Yeah, how to preserve productive land. So yes, let's bring diversity in the field, but in the other hand, I will lose some productive area. What are the solutions? First of all, use the area which are not so easy to accommodate for the operation. The wetlands, for example, can be a little bit preserved and even enlarged a little bit. It's not always needed to cultivate exactly down to the bank of the river or of the pond of the lakes. Always keep buffer area there around these water bodies. They are usually very rich in biodiversity, and they are always difficult to operate and to cultivate. But you have also other areas which are not always productive, like the areas very close to forests, or you might have some areas, maybe less in Ukraine, but where you have too many stones in some corners. The corner of the fields where the corners are very tough, it's better to keep this corner for biodiversity and take a longer round, a longer radius with the machine. Edges, also forest edges, I've said. But also, like on this second picture, you have the forest edges here on the right. On the left it's in England, in the UK. That's an organic farmer who decided that he doesn't want to turn around all these electric posts anymore. He has a few fields with electric lines crossing the field, and he decided to establish biodiversity strip just below, just under the lines, and then for the rest of the area, he can just run straight instead of just turning around the post. Once again, with mechanical weeding, this is not always easy to clean everything. Then you end up with dirty crop, much more time spent to turn around the post and so on. So not much results, and and a lot of disadvantage. So why not in this kind of strips implementing some biodiversity strips? Diversity at every level, like I mentioned at the beginning. Blend of varieties, blending some varieties over the same crop is already a kind of biodiversity improvement. Associating the crops, like barley and peas, I think Mykola mentioned it, or any cereal with legumes. Agroforestry in the field, that's a subject in itself. We are not going into it today. Strip cropping also, they are all possible with mechanization. This alley cropping, like you see on the top, on the two pictures actually, if they are well chosen and well designed, there is no hindering of machinery by following this kind of design. Few words about crop associations. If you are looking at crop association, you have a lot of possibilities. I would say imagination is the limit. If you respect a few principles, first of all, try to find maturities that are matching. Some crops which are going to maturity at the same time, and to have seeds which can be mechanically easily separable, so bigger and smaller seeds altogether. Many combinations are possible. Usually we can see cereal and legume crops, sometimes oilseed and legume. The picture here, I took it in Lithuania. It's a combination of veg and faba beans, so two legumes together. One is for seed production, veg is for seed production, inorganic, and the faba beans is for protein production. They go very well together, and I can tell you that the wheat following this association is performing as much as a conventional wheat. Just have a look at the level of nitrogen in the soil. They produce every year over 6 tons of wheat in Lithuanian context, which is not that easy, inorganic, following this association. Last chapter of this presentation, how can we introduce livestock and animals into the system? Usually the limits are that arable farmers, they don't want to create a new activity, dedicated activity by growing animals. And they don't really like to allocate also land for forage just to have animal grazing in the fields. So there are solutions like reorganization of, there are solutions regarding the allocation of land for forage. Like I mentioned at the beginning, having livestock allow farmers to harvest non-mature crops, meaning you can imagine having a short crop and forage, or 2 forage crop in 1 year, like two harvests of immature crop. The reorganization of the rotation will allow to maximize the cover crop, but also the permanent cover crop. What we see usually in the arable operation without livestock is rotation with minimum inputs, is rotation based on 1 or 2 years of permanent crop like clover and alfalfa without harvest, and then 5 years of arable crops, taking advantage of this 2-year fertility built lace. Having animals can really maximize the use of this perennial cover crop, which are usually not profitable on the short term for the farmers. Also, think about recycling and recovering all the residues from the grains, from the seed selector on the farm. I mentioned it at the beginning. Poultry and pigs can really value the low quality grains and then adding values to the arable crop directly. But the first problem for arable farmers when it comes to integrating livestock into systems is they don't have experience or time available for a new operation. This can be, at least in the West, now on this side, I don't really know the situation in Ukraine, for example, but we have more and more young people which would like to invest into farming and to start farming activities, but they don't have land available, they don't have the infrastructure. This can give opportunity to offer for off-farm installation. We have more and more, for example, sheep shepherds, which doesn't have the proper land and proper buildings, but they are going from one farm to another to value crop residues, to graze a cover crop in between 2 cash crops, and it is really a win-win situation. Farmers, they see the advantage, and the shepherds they have land enough to graze their sheep. What I've seen also in America, quite interesting system. In the northern part of the US, the land is mainly used for spring crops like soybean and corn, and you have again independent farmers which doesn't really have land. They are grazing big herds of Angus usually, and they used to graze corn stalk in the winter, even under the snow. And the farmers, they establish a system where they are waiting the livestock when they enter in the corn stalk just after the harvest, and they are waiting the herd at the end of the winter. And the breeder, the livestock farmer, is paying the arable farmer by the kilogram that livestock is gaining on the stalk during the winter. And the positive effect of that is that arable farmer now in this system, they are growing cover crop under the corn to improve the quality of the stalk and the quality of the grazing of the animals, in order for the livestock to gain more weight. So this is also a solution to be paid by the kilogram, and then it's really push both sides to maximize the system. Another partial solution alternative would be the composting. We've been talking about compost in a previous presentation, but compost can partially bring the advantage of livestock grazing, being multiplying the bacteria and fungi, and bringing antipathogenic effect to the soil. So mainly enriching the bacteria and the fungi population of the field can be done by using the compost. And just for conclusion, a few takeaway message for today. These are principles to be followed as best as possible, but not goals to be achieved to reach this regenerative status. The rotation must be always flexible in function of the condition. Try to think on a relay in all sequences. More and more, try not to have all in, all out sequences with the crop, but having the system when you harvest your crop, the following one is already growing. It's a huge step in this direction. If you really need to, let's say, reset the situation by a tillage operation, try to shorten these empty periods as much as possible. Plowing, in my view, is not totally forbidden, but if it's wisely used, in sometimes it could be the least bad solution. And this is mainly for non-organic farmers, but the organic markets really open up the rotation to many crops with high agronomic interest, more than in conventional. There is more demand on a wide range of variety of crops than in conventional, and have a look at every possibilities of different crop that you have on the market. So this webinar has been hosted thanks to the contribution of Safoso, also of the Swiss Confederation, under the QFPT program that we are collaborating with FiBL. Thank you for your attention. I hope I haven't been too long, and I hope this was useful for some of you, organic or not.
Еля, дуже дякуємо вам.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, for your excellent presentation. Are there any questions to both our well, Nicolas first, or Mykola, because Mykola is Nicola and Ukrainian, same name. So, Mykola, would you like to present the expert of FAO on the tillage chair, senior lecturer, and tillage and cultivation chair of the Research Institute. Regenerative farming. Well, can you develop this topic? I actually had a question to both our presenters. What is the mission of regenerative farming? It's to you both. What's the mission of regenerative farming? There should be some goal. Is there? I wonder. Mykola, you were the first. You will be the first to defend regenerative farming. This is the most challenging issue because if we regenerate something should be generated. Yes, what was destroyed to regenerate, and we cannot regenerate till the condition of soils that we had 300 years ago because this is practically impossible. And if we take it literally back to its wildlife condition, we can regenerate fertility of soils, have more humus in it, for example, the contents of humus. And we can regenerate the ecosystem, the ecological areas, environmental areas. We can influence and have more vegetation than we normally have, and increase the number of insects or even wildlife species, not in the fields necessarily, but the artificial areas. So we have to create something new and improve the situation. We cannot come back to the natural status. What Nicolas has to say to that?
Yeah, quite the same.
On this head.
Interesting question, because we are not doing agriculture just for the sake of doing nice things. I mean, first of all, the farms have to be profitable. What are we trying to regenerate? The question is difficult because for the last 50, 60 years, thanks to intensive agriculture, we've been destroying a lot of things that we even don't know. I mean, the idea is we know that we've been destroying a lot of natural balances, pests and beneficial insects, but also crop nutrition, biochemical systems in the soil. We don't know exactly what we have been destroying, but what we see is that when we start applying these principles, these practices, some things are happening. And I know that organic farmers, they see it already. Usually we believe that stopping using synthetic fertilizer will lead to zero yields. And it's not true. Usually organic farmers, they can be quite impressed themselves by what they can achieve without using synthetic fertilizer. Just for conclusion, I would just mention a discussion I had with some Ethiopian farmers 2 years ago. They were really not used with synthetic fertilizer. They used for generation to grow without any synthetic fertilizer. But for since some years, the government is giving for free fertilizer just to help them feed themselves, very small farmers. And they say now our soils, they are dependent, they are addicts on synthetic fertilizer. We used to grow much more crop without anything before using this fertilizer than today. They say now when we stop using this fertilizer, the soil is not giving anything anymore, just because we've been destroying something which was naturally present in the soil, azotobacter and so on, which are not there anymore. And now we are like addict to synthetic fertilizer.
Esteemed colleagues, if we do not know what we destroy and what we rectify, so what are we doing? Can you imagine a medical doctor who is administering medicine and say, I don't know what is happening inside your body, but this is a good thing. This is for your own benefit. and you have to pay and pay for this. So, however strange it might sound, our forefathers, the previous generations, they knew very well that fertility is measured in harvests, in yields. There is natural fertility. When it drops, we cannot regenerate, so we leave it to nature. And yes, and it rests and stays for 8 years. After 8 years, it regains the fertility because nature takes care of it. Another thing that we should discuss, we say that we have degradation of soil. So for us to understand that we have mechanical damage to the soil because of intensive cultivation or tillage in the 20th century, mechanical damage to the soils. Nature had never experienced that. Open soils, not mulched, and exposure to water, to sun, and the quality, physical properties, agrophysical degradations, fractures, and it's never fractured when you have forest belts, but here we can see that there's no cation exchange, no humus. We're trying to compensate for that. So regenerative farming is an academic way to make the soils fertile again. Nobody would take care of that. It hasn't been known. And farmers had to manage their land, manage the arable land, how it was up to them. Now we understand that it is our life that is at stake, our survival. These are the environmental functions. Clear water, clear air, the landscape and all that, forestation. And we have two great presentations, absolutely brilliant. But if we break them down, Nicola, I am really fascinated. But what are the risks we should mention here? It's not just about singing praises all the time. We have to be honest about the risks and say big or small, but there should be some risks, and then we can think of some solutions. So I'm not sure about the rest of the audience here, but such academic discussions, by way of introduction, are very useful. But let's not confuse practice with theory. Practice is experience, expertise, technology, system on farming. That's what we use as terms in Ukraine. There are realistic systems of academic schools, regenerative, and so forth. But there are real organic, which is practical, with mean till or zero till and no till. So there are two principal factors of degradation for soil: tillage and pesticide. Now, regenerative no-till has demonstrated the benefit. We have to learn. We are all for the covering crops, but covering crops and have their price, have the cost, and not just in terms of cash. If we have covering crops, do we have enough humidity for winter crops, which come next, and how should we do that? So I would like to thank you, and secondly, I'm not sure about this format, but this is too big an issue to draw some specific conclusions. Nicolas is very versatile in his approach, but we have to be more specific. And for organic farming specifically, because there are three principles. If we talk about the principles, there are three principles according to the UN: min tillage, diversification, rotation, and covering crops. In addition to that, anything we add to this, that is above. That is a superstructure. And we have to do that, but this should be done for the organic farming system specifically. So let's arrive at some indicators for regeneration. What is regenerative? Humus, every decimeter, humidity, density, and we generate the critical values for every parameter for the soil, for the plot to be observed. Arable plots, arable fields. The last but not least, before we start any kind of regeneration, we have to organize the landscape. And it's ecological monitoring of the plot. And based on such observations, we can make great efforts to regenerate if it is really necessary. Perhaps it's just erosion or reorganization of the territory question. So I'm very much in favor of doing something, but before that, we have to monitor the situation and set up the parameters for such observation. Now, no matter how much we profess anything, but if there is no economic effect, there is no profit, the system cannot survive. This is all about economy. This is commercial production. So we should bear this in mind. There should be some financial compensation if somebody is committed to earning arrangement. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, our time is up practically because we have time until 1800. So we have to conclude. And just a couple words. Mykola, now this is an organic discussion club. For more than 6 months, we are trying to address organic farmers specifically and provide them with some solutions. So for the crops, for the soil, Nicola has made so far 2 presentations on the soils, absolutely brilliant. And we are talking about non-organic farmers as prospects for organic farming in the future, because they are concerned with the yields, concerned with other things. We have to sort of convert them. And one participant is missing. He always acts as a critic of this and whatever we offer, but it's in the chat box. Yes, it's about the salty soils. So I cannot see this, so it was somewhere. So it says that we have to set the interpreters free at the 1800. What's the place with the salty soils and regenerative? I can answer that in any kind of farming. This is the salty soils should be taken care of, but this is not the first priority. Far from that. It's because of irrigation. Less irrigation, less salt in the soils. That's because we have practical no irrigation currently. Would like to apologize, but Nicolas, thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. And next year we hope to be joined by you, supported by you. We appreciate very much your contribution. And next Thursday is our last session. And it's not about lecturing, it will be rather a discussion of the year, taking stock of what is done, giving presents, singing carols, and saying goodbye to this year. And thank you very much. See you next Thursday. That will be our last for the year. Last but not yes, last. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.